the last lecture in our philosophy and religious studies lecture series for this spring term 2023. And we are honored to have as our guest speaker today, Professor Yuri. I hope that my pronunciation is correct.
Absolutely, yes? Absolutely.
He's a Michael Lipson Professor in Chinese Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he's also the director of the Confucius Institute. But he has a teaching experience, wide teaching experience in Asia, especially in particular, I think he is teaching at the Beijing Normal University and has taught at the Nankai University. Yeah. His primary research interest and area is political thought and political culture of early China. Publications are amazingly numerous. Is the author of many monographies, edited books, chapters, and journal papers. Just to mention I think the most recent monography published by Columbia University Press in 2020, that was a work on Zhou history, unearthed, the bamboo manuscript Xijian and early Chinese historiography. Professor Yuri, we are delighted to have you here, and we're looking forward to hearing your talk today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that next time I shall speak normally to a normal audience, because after 3 years, I think all of us are fed up with these Zoom conferences and Zoom talks. But let me start. As you have seen, I have selected a topic which is not the most popular topic, the attack on the intellectuals. You know, we have our own class feeling. We are intellectuals. We don't like to discuss people who hate us. We don't like to discuss people who attack us. We don't like those who hate intellectuals. And I think this is what was the reason for the very bad attitude toward Shang and Han Fei throughout Chinese history. But you know, very few people address this anti-intellectualism, but there was 50 years ago an extremely influential article by one of the greatest sinologists ever, Professor Yu Shi. He was then very early in the very early stage of his academic career, and as some of the people remember, some of the people know, back in the mid-70s. The apex of anti-Confucian campaign in the mainland China and in Taiwan, where Professor Yu was located, it was also not the most liberal atmosphere. So he was very pessimistic, and he discussed the anti-intellectualism in Chinese traditional culture. Actually, his idea was that only Confucians were pro-intellectuals, all the rest were against intellect, against usage of intellect in politics, and against the intellectuals. And his idea was that by the Han Dynasty, Confucians joined this anti-intellectualism, and from then onward, China was suppressing intellectuals. I'm not sure that it is the most justifiable conclusion, but surely has a lot of good points. I would not try to address all the range of the questions which Professor Yu addressed. I am focusing on only one tradition, which I call the Fa tradition. It was very often called the legalists, and my good friend, Professor Paul Goldin, had tried to explain why the term is not good. So we are now trying to use the more neutral term, the Fa tradition. It is not school. It is a general tradition, but not an organized school like Confucians. So why these people? Those who contributed to the book of Lord Shang and Han Fei, the two major texts are associated with the Fa tradition, why they disliked the intellectuals. Now, recall, they were not tillers and fighters. They were intellectuals themselves. Both Shang and Han Fei, and of course their nameless disciples and followers, were intellectuals. Why do you attack your own stratum? What are the reasons? Can it be justified? And what is the price? What is the rationale of this attack? And what is the price paid? And this is part of my broader engagement with the far tradition with, I have translated and studied the book of Lord Shang, and I am now collaborating with Professor Christoph Hapsmeyer and Professor Jens Peterson, and Hapsmeyer has translated Feizi. We are trying to forward this publication. So it's an interesting topic which both texts address. Let us start. To start with, we shall start with a reminder. We are in the age of the 100 schools of thought. We are in the age of the immense pluralism, and everybody knows 100 schools of thought, no orthodoxy, no political orthodoxy, no ideological orthodoxy. You can say whatever you want. Freedom of expression, freedom of thought. And there are huge differences among competing thinkers. But what interested me from the beginning of my engagement with Chinese intellectual history is that when you go beneath the very strong and very real disagreements, you find several common points. And these common points, I believe, they are foundations of Chinese political culture, well, from the late Warring States period into the modern era. What are these points? Number one, stability is in unity, the Dai Tong, the great unification of all under heaven, which now is translated as unity of China, justifiably or not. I'll not discuss it now. Number two is very important. There is no unity without the unifier. In traditional Chinese political thought, there must be one single locus of authority, who is the monarch, Wang, and that is what my late teacher and mentor, Professor Liu Zihua, named the Wang Quanzhi, the principle of monarchism, the principle which was shared by everybody except Zhuangzi, perhaps, but all the rest, yes. Number three, the principle of meritocracy, the idea that not the pedigree will determine your position, but your abilities. Again, there is huge debate, which abilities, how to determine one's merit, how to determine who is worthy or not, but everybody agrees, not the sons of the worthies are worthies. Those who made some efforts must prove their worth and their eligibility to become administrators. Number four, not as universally shared, but broadly shared, that the intellectual's self-realization is in serving the government. You must go and serve. You must fulfill yourself in the government service. It is, again, very broadly accepted. Number five, we shall not discuss it, but I call it the benevolent paternalism. You take care of the people below. They're not supposed to participate in government, but you are very much committed to their well-being. We shall not discuss number one and number five. We shall discuss number two to number four. They are points of consensus. Confucians, far thinkers, so-called legalists, so-called Taoists, again, a very problematic term, but Lao Tzu and the so-called Huang Lao thought and Mozi, etc., all share these ideas. Now, if everybody shares these ideas, everything is okay, but not everything is okay. As my heroes of today's talk, Lord Shang and Han Fei, realized, the discourse, the haughty discourse of intellectuals of their age undermines these basic points of consensus of rival intellectuals. And this brings us to the first point of my talk, the rise of the Shi. Now, Shi, whether or not they can be translated as intellectuals, Professor Yu Yingshi tried to make very strong points that it is a good translation. It is not 100%, but basically it is okay. So Shi are the men of service, the new stratum, which comes from the bottom of hereditary aristocracy, and by the 4th century BCE, they become the new ruling stratum in every of the states of the Chinese world back then. What happened are two major breakthroughs. One is political. The proliferation of the idea of meritocracy, the proliferation of the idea no pedigree does not determine your status. For me, it is until now one of the crucial questions to which I have no answer. Why China's aristocrats? Because China was a very aristocratic country by the 6th century into the 5th century BCE. All the positions were of hereditary ministerial lineages. Why these lineages gave up their power without any fight? unlike European aristocrats, for instance, it is a question which still, excuse my reply, it's not clear. We don't have real fight against it. What we have, that by the 4th century BCE, in most of the countries of which we have any idea how they function, newcomers, members of the stratum, occupy high positions at the expense of local hereditary aristocrats. Number 2, even more amazing, these position themselves as a collective possessors of the way. But by the way, Dao, I mean the foundational principles of political, social, sometimes cosmic and individual order, but mostly political and social order. By the 4th century BC, it is clear to everybody that the ruling courts, the rulers, don't have anything to say about how to rule their country. Now, we have so many texts. We have so many historical, quasi-historical, whatever text from the Warring States period, including a lot of the texts which were discovered in the recent archaeological discoveries. We almost never hear the ruler speaking. The ruler does not have an authority to speak. When the ruler speaks, he usually asks his advisor how to rule the country, how to solve the problem, and then heeds the advisor's advice. Again, it is amazing how it happened that the rulers, who were quite powerful back then, lost all intellectual authority. It's one of the puzzles. Now, to explain you how puzzling it, when you read the 2 texts which are usually identified as the most autocratic texts, the autocratic leaning text, Feizi and Shang, Book of Lord Shang. Even in these texts, you almost never find a ruler making any intelligent statement. Even in these texts. So not to speak about Confucian or Mozi or Zhuangzi or whatever. Amazing. Now, these intellectuals, they enjoyed very good life. I think that we are all very envious of their life because, first of all, they were much needed. They positioned themselves as a good advisor. So if you want your state to succeed, you need to hire good intellectuals. It is number 1. Number 2, they were free to travel across the Chinese world. They were free to cross the boundaries. And when they crossed the boundaries, it was accepted that, yes, yesterday they served the state of Chu, and today they are going to Zhao, and tomorrow they will go to Qi. Why not? So in this situation, it was very difficult to punish them. It was very difficult to persecute them because like in our modern universities, you know, if my president is rude to me, I will go to Beida or to Macau University or to whatever university I prefer, to Heidelberg or to Chicago or to whatever, and it will be very, very problematic from the point of view of my president. So he will not punish me because if I leave and then other scholars will not be satisfied and leave, it will be the brain drain. So it allows me to say to my president whatever I want, as in most universities we do. And this was the situation back then. To illustrate the haughtiness, it is the Hebrew word of chutzpah, you're really very haughty, of the intellectuals' discourse, I shall give you a few examples. I shall start with the great leader of all intellectuals in China for 23 centuries, Mengzi. Mengzi is so proud of himself, is so proud of his stratum, and you can see, Zhengzi is saying, yes, the states of Jin and Chu, they are there very rich, but I have my benevolence. They have their ranks, I have my righteousness, which means I am almost like them. So, okay, yes, in the court we prize your rank, but in supporting the generation and prolonging the people's life, nothing is comparable to virtue. And virtue is something that we, the intellectuals, have, not the rulers. And here is immediately the conclusion. So the ruler who has great plans must have a minister who cannot be summoned. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very nice. I also think that if my president wants me to come to his office, he must be very polite and maybe visit myself before or send me an email and ask whether or not I have time. But, you know, we are not living in the universities. We are living in the Warring States period of China. in the countries which are almost permanently at war and in which subordination to the ruler is commonly accepted as the way to attain political unity. And then Mengzi insists that the minister will not be summoned. Just the ruler must respect the minister. And it is not the most dramatic statement of Mengzi. Go to this. Here, and imagine this discussion between Lord Mo of Lu and Zisi. Zisi is Confucius' grandson. Mengzi admires him. It was a century before Mengzi, so we don't know anything about the reality. But the ruler asked, how did the rulers of a 1,000 chariot states manage to befriend Shi? You see, befriend. They want to be friends of their advisors. And Zisi is not happy. He speaks, talk of service. Don't talk of friendship. And then Mengzi says, judging by position, you are the ruler and I am the minister. How dare I befriend the ruler? No problem. But judging by virtue, you serve me. How can you befriend me? What is judging by virtue? You serve me. Virtue, you know, it is not just moral virtue. It is a very complex term in early Chinese thought, which means, among other things, maybe primarily to other things, the ruler's charisma, the ruler's very foundation of his right to rule his country. And here, Mengzi says, in terms of your charisma, you should serve me. Serve me. And that is why you see it in Chinese, 是我. It is not used in the context of the ruler. It is extremely haughty expression of self-confidence. And it is not only Mengzi. We don't have time, but you will trust me. You have time and again. I'd give you examples just from the excavated materials, just to show you that we have it in the real materials, which are 100% reliable, scientifically excavated. So it is one of the statements. Ruler and minister are like friends. They select each other. Now, sorry, we're speaking of the ruler-centered polity. We are speaking of the obedience of the ministers to the ruler. The ministers are servitors. The word chen means also both the minister and the servitor. But here we are friends. Why not? And it is not the most dramatic statement. You say, okay, you have it from another discovered text. The thearch's minister is named minister, but in fact, he is a teacher. And remember, you know, most of you are Chinese or sinologists, so you know that the teacher is above the students, as you know very well. So the minister of the thearch is this legendary personality who is able to unify all under heaven. He is named minister, but he is a teacher. The monarch's minister, the monarch is a relatively more normal personality, but it is not a ruling king. It is the one who will come and unify all under heaven again. He is named minister, but in fact, he is a friend. Only the due to perish minister, the ruler's minister, is named minister, but in fact, he is a slave. So if you want to succeed, give us good position, respect us. And to finalize this point, I will go to one text, which I always believe that it must be read as a promotion campaign of the Shi, of the intellectuals of the Warring States period. Liu Shiqunxiu, ironically written at the court of the person who will become the first emperor of China and who will not be very, very happy to have these intellectuals around him, as we shall see. But look at this promotion campaign. Shi are those men. Now look, Shi, not some of Shi, all of us, all of our stratum, all the intellectuals, Shi Jiweiren, are those men who are acting in accord with proper patterns, don't escape the difficulties when facing the troubles, forget the profits, etc., etc., etc. They cast aside life to follow righteousness. If there are such men, the ruler of a state will not be able to befriend them. The Son of Heaven, the unifier, will not be able to make them servants. And now the crux of the argument, at best, stabilization of all under heaven, or second to it, stabilization of a single state, must come from these men. Come on, It is brazen promotion campaign in which you say, we are so clever, we are so good, so you just employ us and you will achieve all the greatest results. Stabilization of all under heaven. Think about this. Stabilization of all under heaven means establishing political unity after 5 centuries of disorder, which will actually be attained, but not through these men. It will be attained through the power of the armies of the state of Qin and of the first emperor. Now, how can you treat this? And this is the disadvantage of having the Zoom discussion, because actually I would like some of you to intervene and make your points even amid the discussion. So if the audience wants to interrupt me, it is perfect with me, because I know that these statements are quite provocative and some of you may want to react. So interrupt me. I like it. In Israel, it is very, very common, and we enjoy being interrupted. But now, look, not just Shang Yang and Han Fei despised this kind of discourse. Even such people like Xunzi, the great Confucian thinker, were not happy about this. Now, Xunzi was a Confucian, and Confucians are the professional guild of the intellectuals. You know, that is why we all love Confucians. I am the director of Confucius Institute. So I must say something good for promotion of Confucians. They love intellectuals. They are speaking on behalf of the intellectuals, never on behalf of all the rest. They are just professional guild of intellectuals, and Xunzi belongs to them. He believes in intellectuals. He's very proud as an intellectual, but he feels that people like Mengzi, like all the rest of these guys of Liu Shichunxiu, nameless people, they move in the completely wrong direction, because the ruler cannot accept this haughty discourse, this affronts to the ruler, this brazen promotion campaign. The ruler will not tolerate it. So Xunzi, first of all, he dismisses the idea of the ruler-minister's friendship, the very powerful idea in the warring states, never to be found in Xunzi. Is very cautious not to endorse Mengzi-like haughty discourse when he meets the rulers. In the book of Xunzi, there is only one time that there is a dialogue between the ruler, actually the king of the state of Qin, and Xunzi, and the king is very dismissive towards Xunzi, but Xunzi dares not affront him. He speaks very, very, very politely. Yes, we are so good, we can contribute to your state's well-being, etc., etc., but he dares not making this kind of Mengzi style of remarks. And I think that it is a very conscious way to construct yourself as an alternative, as a prudent alternative to the people like Mengzi and the like. And Xunzi is also willing to contemplate that in good state, some intellectuals should not have the freedom of expression. Because, when all these sorry idiots speaking, they destroy our common goal of building a good, nice Confucian universal state. So he speaks that under the orderly rule, Shen Dao and Mozi cannot advise their talks. Hui Shen Deng Si dare not smuggle in their investigations. Now, how they dare not, and how it cannot be? It can be stopped. Xunzi is very, very hesitant here. On the one hand, he mentioned that yes, when one's arguments, persuasions, and explanations are hasty, opportunistic, and not in conformity with ritual and propriety, this is called vile theories. And vile theories, these are one of the 3 vile matters what the sage monarchs prohibited. So if you have a sage monarch, you are supposed to outlaw bad talks. But Xunzi is also very, very careful not to say that every ruler can now suppress intellectuals. He says, now as the sage monarchs had passed away, and remember, the sage monarch in Xunzi is the one who unifies all under heaven. So we have already 5 centuries of disunity. He could not imagine, perhaps, that one who lived at his time will unify the world. So when the sage monarchs had passed away, all under heaven is in turmoil, and vile speech is arising. a nobleman, one of us. He has neither positional power to control it, nor punitive mean to prohibit it, so he uses argumentative persuasions to confront it. At the bottom line, Xunzi is still very much Confucian. We shall use our own power of discourse to fight for our doctrine, and it is exactly what Menzi did before, and it is exactly what all the Confucians would like to do. But let us go now to my real heroes, to the people who did not have this kind of hesitation how to suppress. Now, Shang Yang and Han Fei, I'm sure that all of you know, Shang Yang, the greatest political reformer from the state of Qin, the 4th century BCE. Han Fei is a very sophisticated thinker of the late 3rd century BCE. They have a lot of things in common. They have some differences, and I want actually to emphasize the differences, not just commonalities among them, but fundamentally for our purpose, we can treat them as one body of text. Now, the points which I shall exemplify in a few minutes, I shall show the slides. The points are: A, the intellectuals are socially useless. You remember that we want, or Shang Yang wants, the state in which everybody fights and tills the soil. Agriculture and warfare are the one which should be pursued, and the intellectuals don't belong to it. Their moralizing discourse is a kind of detrimental to the entire political fabric, because they are advanced through their moralizing discourse. And when they are promoted, the tillers and fighters are not promoted, and the entire system of the ranks of merit, which Shang Yang introduced, is eroded. So this is number 2. Number 3, these guys are unruly. The fact that they cross the borders in search of better appointment, it undermines the idea of Shang Yang that the state should control everything, including the movement of its people, especially the movement from one state to another. So why the intellectuals are allowed to move? Funnily, of course, Shang Yang himself was not born in the state of Qin. He was exactly the guy who moved from one state to another and then to the third. But, you know, the rules are not for him. Han Fei added to this two major points. This fake noblemen, the Wei Junzi, the people who fabricate the discourse in which they are so good, so nice, so powerful, but actually they want to undermine the socio-political system. And this is the major problem. Han Fei was much more critical-minded than Shang Yang in terms of the reading of the text. He realizes that these texts are dangerous, that these texts are undermining the ruler-centered polity, and he discovers that some of the intellectuals' texts are subversive of the political order in general, and it is his attack which is even more venomous than that of Shang Yang. Let us start with Shang Yang. Again, I speak about Shang Yang, I speak about the book of Lord Shang, as you can read even in my own introduction to the translation. Not all of the book was written by him. Some may be surely written in his time, and the passage which I am citing now is actually from his time, but whether or not it is he or anybody else, it doesn't matter now for us. Now, this is one of his very provocative statements. The 6 parasites: rites and musics, poems and documents, self-cultivation and goodness, filiality and fraternal duties, sincerity and trustworthiness, integrity and uprightness, benevolence and righteousness. Now, come on, these are parasites. They are very bad for the state. When they overcome the government, the state will be dismembered. And, you know, so many people read it, and of course they are appalled. I understand it. Who of us will not be appalled? You know, you attack all the moral values. Okay, now nobody of us will speak much about the documents, which in any case nobody is able to read very much. And we can even give up the rights and the music. But come on, filiality and fraternal duties, just being filial son, is making you a parasite? And Shang Yang knew that he makes a great provocation. It is not accidental. This provocation on a par with Zhuangzi, actually. Zhuangzi also likes to provoke matters. But you know, Zhuangzi, he's a provocateur, but nobody imagines him ruling the state. Shang Yang was a very powerful political actor. Maybe this one of the most powerful statesmen in Chinese history. So when you read him attacking these values, you are afraid. And that is why intellectuals hated him. Su Dongpo, the greatest, one of the really greatest Chinese intellectuals from the imperial era, from the 12th century, 11th century, sorry, CE, he said, the scholars are ashamed to speak about Shang Yang. Okay, ashamed, yes. But if you read the book of Lord Shang, he does not attack moral values as such. He attacks moralizing discourse because he knows that this discourse is used by the useless intellectuals to promote themselves because they don't want to kill, they don't want to fight, they just want to speak very nicely about poems and documents, about benevolence and righteousness, about self-cultivation and goodness, and be promoted in exchange for this. And when they are promoted, this means that the ranks that should be exclusively given to tillers and soldiers will not be given to tillers and soldiers, which means that the people who Shang Yang engineered the society in which, if you want to be promoted, go to fight, go to cut off enemies' heads. If you don't cut off, sorry, you will not be promoted. And here, suddenly the intellectuals are promoted. So the entire system will be completely destroyed. And here Shang Yang says, when 1,000 people are engaged in agriculture and warfare, yet there is a single man among them who engage in poems, documents, argumentativeness, and cleverness, 1,000 people will all become remiss in agriculture and warfare. You know, I think that in the entire history of Chinese intellectual discourse, not a single person made such a great lavish praise on the power of the intellectuals to influence social morals. Yes, one person of 1,000 will change all 1,000 people's behavior. And Shang Yang warns, if this happens, the state will collapse. Here is his warning: the people will turn their back on farming, and not just this, they will be engaged in false debates, speak grand words, and the people will abandon their superiors, and those who don't behave as subjects will become more and more numerous, and the state will become poor and weakened. And as you know, of course, the greatest goal of Shang Yang, which is until now the first of the 12 core socialist values, is Fu Guoqiang, being, now it is abridged as Fuqiang, the rich and powerful state. Now, if you have intellectuals, if you promote them, if you allow their discourse to disseminate among the ruling stratum, then you fail to attain this goal. And this goal, you know, you may disagree, but I think it is a respectable goal. Actually, who of us would like to live in an impoverished state with a weak army? I think not the diehard liberal would prefer a poor state and a weak army. So Shang Yang has his points. But Shang Yang was not sophisticated enough to discuss how the intellectuals create their immense power. And here comes Han Fei. Han Fei, who, you know, Han Fei is not as impressive as Lord Shang in terms of his political achievements. He did not have any political achievements. He was not assigned any position of authority, even in his home state of Han, not to say about other states. But he was, in my eyes, he's not the most sophisticated thinker, but he's the most sophisticated political analyst in Chinese history. When you read him deeply, you understand how deeply this guy understood everything, understood his rival's discourse and how he was able to manipulate it. Again, Zhuangzi comes to one's mind, but I think that Han Fei was much more serious and even deeper than Zhuangzi. Now, sometimes he echoes Shang Yang. When the state is at peace, it fosters confusions and the bravos. When the troubles come, it uses armored she. Now look, she here She, in this context, are soldiers, not the intellectuals. But he uses this very positively sounding term, not accidentally. So those in charge of affairs take their duties lightly, whereas peripatetic scholars, these peripatetic scholars, or Shang calls them peripatetic eaters, those who go from one court to another and feed themselves at the expense of the masses, both Shang and Han Fei hated them. This is how our generation is reduced to turmoil. Okay, this is point of echoing Shang, but I will go on the novelty of Han Fei's analysis. He focuses his attacks against a group who he terms interminably sometimes scholars, students of text, Confucians and Mohists. And here, I don't know if Ting Mian is in the audience because I cannot see anybody. Okay, now I see that you raised the hand. So read her excellent article that shows that sometimes Confucians and Mohists are not just Confucians and Mohists. It is a generalized term for the moralizers. All of these are fake worthies. And let us see how Shang discerns their problem. First of all, they're useless. Why they're useless? Because their discourse is completely useless. These people, both Confucians and Mohists, and here he means Confucians and Mohists, they adore the past and are ignorant of the present. They all speak about the past models, Yao and Shun, but Yao and Shun will not come alive, and you don't know what Yao and Shun would do in our contemporary world. So all those who invoke the past and are ignorant of the present, they're useless. Never employ them. Second, all these guys, like followers of Lao Tzu, actually, they like the subtle and mysterious words that even the most intelligent find hard to understand. Don't use them. We don't use this Wei Miao Ji. It is exactly reference, of course, to Lao Tzu. C, you cannot employ them because these guys are promulgating simultaneously completely diametrically opposite doctrines, for instance, some yielding and some fighting, etc., etc., etc. And Han Feizi in the chapter 50 has a lot of examples, but you cannot just employ all of them because they contradict each other. Check who of them is good and then employ him. But if you listen to the similar and dissimilar words of motley teachings and misguided behaviors, how can you fail to end up in turmoil? It is very easy. Now, let us make a more sophisticated discussion. And here, the intellectuals are all committed to their private interest, and the private are the opposite of the impartial or common. And the common is not only common, it is the ruler. The ruler represents the common interest. It is a very, very interesting point, which we don't have time to discuss, but those who promote the moralizing discourse, they propose values which fit one individual or one family. A filial son to a father is an absconding subject to the ruler. Sorry. If you care of your father, you cannot go and fight and sacrifice your life in the service of your ruler. So this is not good for the country. Worse, the moralizers, just like Mengzi, create the parallel system of values in which they, the moralizers, stand above, not below the ruler. And this moralizing discourse in which your abilities and your morality and your intelligence are deemed to be more important than your political position, it is a danger to the political order. And Han Fei is the only one who recognizes very well this is the real danger. And time and again, he speaks how dangerous this discourse is, how it undermines everything. Now look, he speaks here about the intellectuals. He uses the very abusive term, people, ordinary men, not she. He's very sophisticated. He knows how to offend the intellectuals. So they have their private interests, but the sovereign is concerned with the common benefit, of course, because the common and the sovereigns is the same. Not to work, but to have enough to sustain oneself, not to serve, but have one's name illustrious, these are private interests. Stopping textual studies and publishing the laws and standards, etc., that is the common benefit. Look, stopping textual studies. We shall come to this point in 5 minutes. Again, you have the proliferation of these fake worses, the so-called sages and knowledgeable, the people who define themselves as sages and knowledgeable. They multiply, they produce speeches and create statements in order to attack the standards being implemented from above. And when the ruler hits them, the entire political system collapses. The worthies will rest on their illustrious reputation, and the villains will rely on rewards to become rich. Then the superior cannot, this is the ruler, of course, here means by superior, cannot overcome his underlings. So we have here the grave danger to the political order. And Han Fei goes on. Han Fei, in one of the most brilliant chapters, I wanted, and maybe I will write once an article about this chapter, but I really recommend each of you who just thinks to how to make a good article about intertextuality and about very sophisticated discourse, took this chapter, which is not very well known, the loyalty and filiality, chapter 51 in Han Feizi, and a perfect topic for discussion. So he shows how this intellectual discourse serves to undermine the ruler's power, because when the intellectuals hail Yao and Shun, who abdicated their throne to the worthy ministers, and when they hail the founders of the Shang and Zhou dynasties, who overthrew their predecessors, this all means overthrow in the political order. So when everybody affirms the way of Yao and Shun and model himself accordingly, some murder their rulers and some behave hypocritically toward their fathers. Yao and Shun, Tang and Wu, each of them oppose the propriety of ruler and minister, wreaking havoc in teachings for future generation. And here, very funnily, Han Feizi appropriates the ideas of filiality and fraternity, loyalty and compliance, Confucian ideas. He says, these ideas are good, but you, the Confucians who promote Yao, Shun, Tang, and Wu, you undermine your own ideas. And then we don't have time, because we could discuss this chapter for an hour. It is full of gems. He dissects every single aspect of the discourse about Yao, Shun, Tang, and Wu, and shows how this discourse weakens the political system. And he speaks at the end, it's very brilliant observation. Now, if a son always praises other people's parents, saying such and such a son's parents get to sleep late and get up early, with all their might they produce wealth in order to keep their offspring, their male and female servants, that would be to malign his own parents. And it is very true. You know, come on, when I give this talk in China, a sensitive talk, but if you live now in China and you write how Sweden is a great country, is not it that you do it in order to say that you don't like the Communist Party of China? Very often it is. Very often people who like how Sweden is a great country, they don't know anything about Sweden, but they write about it just to express their opposition to the party. So Han Feizi is right. It is a problem. We don't like the censors, but Han Feizi, he would be an excellent censor in China or in any country with a strong censorship. If a minister always praises the bountiful virtue of the former kings, turning his hopes toward it, this is to malign his ruler. He who rejects his parents is called unfilial, but he who rejects his ruler is considered worthy throughout all under heaven. That is why all under heaven is in turmoil. Okay, in terms of the brilliance of paying attention to the problems of this moralizing discourse, Han Fei is brilliant, but let us go now to the bottom line, and the bottom line is not pleasant, because Han Fei has very clear conclusions. What should be done? The conclusions are: one subject should not praise the worthiness of Yao and Shun, should not extol the punitive expeditions of Tang and Wu, should not talk about the loftiness of zealous men of service. That is it. Only he who dedicates all his force to safeguard the standards and focuses wholeheartedly on serving the sovereign is the loyal minister. So here, should not. And Han Fei doesn't think that it is by self-education that you should not. The freedom of expression should be stopped. Accordingly, in the country of a clear-sighted sovereign, there are no texts written in books and on bamboo strips, but the law is a teaching. There are no discourses of the former monarchs, but officials are the teachers, etc., etc. And as all of you know, 20 years after Han Fei's death, the guy who caused his death, Li Si, his fellow intellectual and one who very committed to the same ideas like Han Fei, he will introduce this book burning. Here, of course, in the by the Ming Dynasty, it became associated also with a burial, with a murder of the scholars, which is not related originally, but it is not a major point for myself. It is a very good point to start the concluding remarks. First of all, again, the topic of the book burning of 213 BCE is too well known, but to remind you, this was a point of extreme trauma, extremely traumatic experience for Chinese intellectuals, well into the current era, well into the Cultural Revolution, etc., etc., etc. So the guys who were responsible for this book burning, Shang, Han Fei, Li Si, they were immensely hated, and they are hated well into our days. You know, even when Chinese government tries to say something good about their ideas, it dares not extol these people. You know, when I speak about Shang in China, in the mainland China, the fellow intellectuals are unhappy because they think that I promulgate totalitarianism, but the Chinese government officials are also unhappy because they think that it is not the topic that should be raised. All the foreigners should speak about Laos and Kunz, and everything will be okay. But let us look at this anti-intellectual attack, whether it is justified or not. I think there are some justified points. For instance, when you are in the warring states, and the idea is that you should mobilize all your human resources to tilling and fighting, it is not nice. It is surely not our age, and it is not what we would like to live in. But back then, it was very logical, maybe not very positive, but very logical. So you cannot ignore the logic of suppressing intellectuals. However, the weakness of this point that the far thinkers did not understand. Sometimes it is not bad to have intellectuals, even in the fighting country. There is a soft power. I don't know whether there are the IR people, the international relations people in the audience, but you know, to have a powerful state, you need some intellectuals who will know to sell the state. And actually, Liu Buwei, who convened many intellectuals in the state of Qin at on the eve of the imperial unification, he did it in order to improve the image of the state of Qin. He understood that you need soft power, but neither Shang nor Han Fei realized the importance of this soft power. Number one. Number two, that moralizing discourse produces fake noblemen. I think, I'm afraid, it is absolutely true. How many people who are speaking loftily on behalf of democracy and human rights are glossing over woeful violations of democracy and human rights? How many people who speak loftily of patriotism are actually traitors to their country's interests? How many people who speak about whatever family values abuse these family values? Every moralizing discourse, socialist, liberal, whatever you want, religious, produces a lot of hypocrites. But this said, And I agree, yes, there were a lot of fake noblemen, and today there are a lot of fake noblemen, whether in China or in Greece, in Israel, in United States, even in Macau, I'm sure. Even in our universities, we have so many fake noblemen. But the problem is, what is an alternative? Okay, let us say we don't want the moralizing discourse because it is hypocritical and unworthy. But what is an option? To have the Nazis? To have the human hatred elevated as a moral value? I'm not sure that it is a good option. So sometimes, even when we know that this discourse discloses a lot of hypocrisy, it is better to have nice hypocrites than brazen, immoral leaders. It is number 2. Number 3. Yes, we don't like to acknowledge it, but Feizi was completely correct. There was subversion of the ruler's authority in a great variety of the texts of his period, especially in Confucian texts. Very well hidden, and he exposes this hidden subversion. Nice. But if you outlaw subversive discourse, you outlaw legitimate criticism. And again, it is what happens today in the mainland. It is not that suppression of critically minded intellectuals is completely unfounded. Yes, there are people who want to subvert the Communist Party rule. It's normal. China is a large country, and there are people who really use very nice discourse in order to undermine the party and to cause its collapse. So the party is defending itself. I can understand it, but very clearly, by defending itself, it suffocates, it stifles legitimate criticism. And this is a point which Feizi himself was aware. He said, yes, critical words are painful, but they're useful for you. So even Feizi did not want to suffocate criticism completely, but how can you suffocate any subversive discourse without suffocating legitimate criticism? He never came to the good answer, and nor can I suggest you any good answer. I have no idea. That is why I'm a historian and not a political thinker. Okay, finally, why? Why the far thinkers endorse this blatant anti-intellectual discourse? Did not they realize that they fight against their own stratum? They were not tillers and soldiers, as I have reminded you at the beginning. They were intellectuals. So why they betrayed their class? Here, there are 2 interpretations. A cynical, you want to ingratiate yourself with the rulers. Yeah, maybe. But you know, if you want to ingratiate yourself with the rulers, you write secret memorials. You don't need to publish openly, broadly, and to disseminate your ideas. And the Lord of Shang and Feizi enjoyed publicizing their views. So they knew very well how to say something which will not be publicized, but they wanted to be publicized. So surely the cynical interpretation is not entirely correct. But now let me say a lofty interpretation, which is very rarely associated with these guys. They realized the negative aspects of the peripatetic scholars' discourse. And yes, they wanted to prove their impartiality by attacking the very stratum to which they belonged. Jiang Tao had written an excellent book recently published 2 years ago, the Origins of Moral Political Philosophy in Early China. And he speaks, it is finally that a philosopher speaks very nicely about the far thinkers. He says that they have their own moral ideal. Their moral ideal is the ideal of the impartiality, Gong represented the common interest. So for the sake of the common interest, they sacrificed the interest of their own stratum and themselves within their stratum, because their betrayal came at the very heavy price. And the price, and it is my final slide, that when you betray the intellectuals, they don't like you. And when they don't like you, you are not able to disseminate your ideas for long. The ideas of the far thinkers, they have their weaknesses, they have their strengths, just like the ideas of Confucians, of Mozi, of Lao Tzu, of Zhuangzi, or of anybody, Aristotle or Plato or Karl Marx or Locke or whomever you want. But the problem that if you want to somehow disseminate your ideas, you need a group of people who are committed to these ideas. And the group of people who disseminate ideas, by definition, they are intellectuals. Sorry, soldiers and peasants do not disseminate ideas until the 21st century, and I'm afraid that even in the 23rd century. So if you offend the intellectuals, you remain without supporters within the stratum, which is responsible for ideological fertilization of the country. The far thinkers relied only on the ruler's patronage, but it was dramatically short-sighted commitment, because as Han Feizi tells very well, both Shang and Wu Qi, whom he identifies as a quasi-far thinker, paid a very heavy price, and Han Fei himself, and Li Si himself. You know, it is so ironical that the only thinkers who were executed in China in the Warring States period, neither Mengzi nor Zhuangzi, you know, Zhuangzi appalled the rulers. He's completely subversive of ruling power. Even in today's many countries, some of his ideas will be immediately forbidden to disseminate, at least at the school level. But Zhuangzi was not punished. Mengzi was not punished. Those who actually committed themselves to the rulers were punished. It is a bitter irony of history. And it is a bitter irony of history, and maybe the price, inevitable price, that these guys remained without widespread support of the intellectual community and were not able to disseminate their ideas, and their ideas were not completely forgotten, but were sidelined for good and for bad, sometimes for good, but sometimes clearly for bad. And herein lies their tragedy. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking too much time, but now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. This was not just a thought-provoking and inspiring talk, but extremely intense. I'm saying this in a very, very good way. Very intense. Thank you very much. Let's see if there are questions in the venue or on Zoom. On Zoom, maybe I suggest you, because we don't see very well the hands. Maybe you can write in the chat.
I think that Ellen is wanting to ask, and Hans also, yes?
Okay, here we go. Yes, now we can see. Now we have changed the format. Who raised their hand first? Who was quicker?
Yeah, I think I'm the first one.
Ellen.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Yuri, for really fascinating talk. Before I ask question, I have to say that because part of my work also deal with the warfare ethics in ancient China. So I have to say that your work inspired me a lot. So I think it's the first time for me to see you online, but I would thank you for everything. So basically, I agree with, I think, what you try to argue today. And one thing struck me is that you mentioned about in your last slide talk about the problem with legalism, that they might undermine what is called soft power here. So, and that reminded me a lot, because it's one of the biggest argument between Confucianism and legalism is this notion of whether you want to conquer by culture or culturation or morality, or you conquer by military might. And so, in a sense, I try to be more, try to be a little bit sympathetic with legalism in the context, as you mentioned, because it's a warring period of time, and the legalist argument of this notion of wealth nation with this strong army, 富国强兵, sounds to be very realistic. an effective political strategy, particularly in short term. And I think maybe, I don't know, that's my question. Do you think that also has a lot to do with the social transformation in terms of economic system, because it's also the time of introduction of the iron utensils in agriculture, and also new technology in warfare. So I think that's probably part of the reason legalism want to try to emphasize the importance of farming, to increase the the national revenue, and also the importance of military. That's including help people to be involved in as soldiers, because at the time, for Confucian talk a lot about 士农工商, the hierarchical structure, and soldiers, military soldiers or service. Military service is not even mentioned here. And after the declining of the Shang dynasty, the noble system, and so you have this popular saying that a good man does not service in the army. Say like a good iron does not made to be a nail. 好男不当兵，好铁不打钉。Something. So I can see how legalism try to subvert that kind of tradition, try to reestablish a kind of order in that sense. But again, as you said, it's very fascinating. I mean, why legalism, as Shi themselves betrayed the whole class. So my question is that. Maybe they are too realistic. They want to get achievements too quickly. They're looking for emphasize too much on the effectiveness. The reason I'm asking that, because I see the similar problem in China today, looking for effectiveness, looking for kind of this notion to get strong, to get wealthy, but they really ignore what we call soft power. They focus too much on the hard power, not soft power. So in that sense, should they also learn the mistake made by, legalism in ancient China? So that's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I completely agree with your analysis, and of course I completely agree with your bottom line. I think that in current China, and I observed it, I think that many of us who are working in administrative positions in foreign universities and have to collaborate with Chinese officials, etc., we know they are very much result-oriented. They never understand the long-term benefits. They usually are very eager to pour immediately money or to have immediately effectiveness, but establish 100 new Confucius Institute, but not think what we'll want to achieve with these institutes, which I think that nobody really asked himself or herself in China, what are the long-term goals? It is one of these examples of complete commitment to immediate effectiveness at the expense of something which is more long-term and requires more milder, softer approaches. And it is very true, of course, of the far thinkers, so-called legalists. But you can understand back then the era of war, of all against war. And in the war, you cannot be thinking about long-term and about soft power. In the war, you need to win, and you need to win by full, immediate, total mobilization of all your resources to the victory. So with this regard, of course, the far thinkers were the most successful, because ultimately the state of Qin succeeded to unify by their means, but their success came at the expense of long-term success. And then you had to have the Confucians and all the rest to explain how to maintain the country, not how to win the victory in the immediate battle. It is very much true of China today. I can understand very well that the effectiveness of the regime is important. It is an important asset. I don't think that the regime should abandon its commitment to effectiveness, but it is very clear that parallel to this effectiveness, somebody must work in China on the long-term strategy of becoming culturally attractive. And I am afraid to say that today, China is more powerful than it was for the last 250 years, but it is least culturally attractive in the very long term. Even during Mao's period, there was much more soft power of China than it is today. And it is a kind of weakness which surely will require, among other things, to allow critical-minded intellectuals to speak more and perhaps to present China as more pluralistic. It is pluralistic, but it does not want to present itself in this way. So yes, I think that your points are very well taken.
Thank you.
Yes,
Georg?
Hans.
Yes, thank you very much for an excellent presentation and also an excellent reply to Ellen's question. I really liked the presentation a lot. I was also very happy to hear that sometimes you refer to Zhuangzi because there are many parallels, I think, exactly in the way you pointed them out. And this kind of socio-political reading of Zhuangzi is not necessarily something that you read a lot in the contemporary Western reception of Zhuangzi. So I think that's also very important. I just want to share a kind of a wild speculation about the central question you mentioned at the beginning, which is indeed a baffling question. Why could these succeed in the first place? Why could these moralists, as you call them, become so powerful, right? And why could they become more powerful than the politicians and the aristocrats? So like a wild comparison is if we look at moralists today, at moralism today, maybe we can see some similar phenomenon in the rise of wokeism, which also represents kind of a present day moralism, which is specifically strong in the academic field and which increasingly gains influence in the corporate world, for instance. There's hardly a corporation that doesn't present itself at the same time, doesn't feel the need to kind of develop this soft power profile, even in the economic realm, right? And then again, having to do with Ellen's questions and your answer to it, like what you call soft power, I would call it in my terminology, profile building, which is very important. And this profile building has a lot to do with moral discourse, which is a very powerful tool for not just communicating, but also for constituting identity. So that also directly connects with your question. And I think kind of this contribution to profile building that the moralists offer is also something that we see today with the rise of wokeism that becomes a sort of unescapable profile element that all authorities must embrace and integrate into their own identity in order to validate their own profile. And that's true not just in politics, it's also true in the economy, even in academia, right? I mean, you gave this example of the university president. There's not a single university president in the Western world who can afford to have an anti-woke profile. So I wonder if what do you think about this explanation of this baffling phenomenon in preaching China?
Well, first of all, you have an excellent point. I never thought about the corporate world, and now you introduced it. So I must say that it is very convincing. I thought that moralizers are less successful in today's politics because you know that in many countries, after the initial success of moralizers, in most countries there is a reversal because I think it is because of the moralizers. First of all, they go too far, and second, very much like Confucians, they present the world that they want to be, but much less address the world which is really is. And here the legalists or the far thinkers, they had the advantage of they spoke about the real world, which was nasty. They spoke about it in much nastier terms maybe than it was. But when Frank Feizi says that everybody is self-interested and everybody wants, your wife wants to kill you if you are the ruler because your favorite concubine wants to kill you, your son wants to kill you, your brother wants to kill you, everybody wants to kill you. It's tough. Confucians don't like this, but sometimes we need the reminder that there are bad guys in this world, even among the oppressed and whatever groups, unfortunately, which is moralizers don't want to address too much. And so I never thought about your perspective that in the corporate world, the moralizers succeeded. I thought they succeeded in academia because academia is very weak. And I am afraid that the more moralizers are succeeding in academia, the weaker academy becomes politically, because at least in Israel, it is very clear that academy is by far much better than the country in general. It is incomparably more moral and more nicer than the government and the political system. But the more the gap increases, the smaller is the impact of the academic voices on political and social life, and it is a kind of a price. So we are becoming a strong community of very, very proud of ourselves and saying, yes, we are so great, we are so moral, but the rest of the world goes in a very different direction. Now you allowed me to think that the corporate world is, because it is maybe more important than the academy for policymakers. So it is good that at least there you have some kind of moral impact. In the Warring States period, I would think that my comparison is the comparison of the revolutionary France, 18th century. In France, a great crisis. Everybody understands that nothing works as it should work. And then you have a lot of philosophers who have a lot of ideas. Some of them are, from our contemporary perspective, are quite wired. I don't think that we are going now to go back to Rousseau and think that volonté générale is a good thing. I am afraid of it more than I am afraid of many other things. But back then, so many philosophers. And after the French Revolution, they are enshrined and they put in the pantheon, and people feel philosophers are so great. Of course, then later you need to have completely different political direction. I thought maybe because of the depth of the crisis in the Warring States period, not in the Warring States, actually the deep crisis was in the Chuncio period, in the springs and autumns, when everything collapses and nobody has any solution. And then the political power devolves and devolves and devolves, and we go to the depth of complete disintegration. And as a reaction, you have philosophers of the Warring States. Each of them tries to have his different solution, but each of them promotes something which is much better than what was. So then the rulers are eager to listen to them. And maybe that is why even the hereditary aristocrats say, okay, we really did not know what to do. Maybe we shall heed these advisors. And then these advisors become so powerful that you no longer can fight them. So maybe this is a kind of, but we in the 21st century, luckily for us, we're still not in the depth of the crisis, which requires too many political philosophers. That is why actually current political philosophy, I think, is non-existent. I'm sorry for the colleagues, but it is not a kind of, we're not in the age of thriving political philosophy today, because our life is still good. I'm afraid that it may be not the case soon, but I am lucky that I am old enough not to warn about the future.
Thanks.
Questions? Damian.
Can you hear me well, Yuri?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
If you can also open the, you cannot open the screen to be seen because I cannot see you at all.
Yes.
I see something. Okay.
Yeah, this is Timian. In case you cannot see the screen clearly, I cannot agree with you more on the point about the Fa tragedy, which is very true, not only in ancient China, such as Han Feizi's case, but also in contemporary China, that on the one hand, they are considered to be the class traitors. On the other hand, they are also constantly punished by the political authority. So I want to compliment or back up your claim, this Fa tragedy, with some contemporary examples that I witnessed recently. Like you mentioned in your talk, that today it's difficult for scholars to speak positively about Shang and Han Feizi because for the CCP or for the political authorities, they would consider this to be an insinuation as their way of ruling, right? And for the liberalist, general public, especially the liberalist, they would think that you are supporting authoritarian regimes and so on and so forth. So usually most of us, even though we are sympathetic to some points made by legal far thinkers, we tend to not to talk about it. And the events that I want to mention is that, as you pointed out in your PowerPoint slides, that fast thinkers try to warn the rulers not to allow the intellectuals to praise Tang and Wu and ancient sage rulers, because this is going to undermine the legitimacy of their power. And this happens to today's China as well. As you said, all the far thinkers' ideas are still relevant to contemporary China. That in recent decades, some scholars or academics trying to warn the CCP regime, the government, to stop promoting Sun Yat-sen. Because we know King Tang and King Wu and Sun Yat-sen, they are founding fathers, but at the same time, they are also subversive figures. So if you want to praise Sun Yat-sen, somehow you are praising revolutions against the established power. But then those scholars who friendly remind the government not to praise Sun Yat-sen in a high-profile ways, they were invited to have a talk with the party secretaries of their universities. So this is paradoxical, and like you rightly, like you said, this is a Fa tragedy. I really like the way you put it. And in terms of ancient China, I always have this question in mind because I'm not so much familiar with the history. So I would like to ask you this question. Like you said in the beginning of your presentation, that in the Warring States period of time, intellectuals seem to enjoy a very privileged position, and they even dared to put themselves above the rulers. But I find it weird that at the same time, many states in the Warring States, they try to do the reformation, to try to 编户齐民, for example, to register their people, because in the past, those intellectuals, they could travel around between different states. Today they can serve this ruler, and tomorrow they will leave this state for another state. So the historical question I have in mind is that, did those state rulers try to register those intellectuals in their states, or give them hukou, some kind of household, in order to keep them in their states? That's my first question. And the other question is related to this one, that I wonder, because Han Feizi, both Han Feizi and Zhuangzi, always likes to talk about the story of Confucius being stuck in between Chen and Cai. So this is my sense about this paragraph in Han Feizi and Zhuangzi, that they said that those traveling intellectuals are constantly considered to be a threat to the state. So this brings us back to the question I want to ask you. Since this is they are obviously dangerous to the rulers. So why didn't the ruler at the time when they are reforming the system do not try to keep them in their own states? So this is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great question, and I don't have an answer why. I can explain you what happened in the Yan Ho Chi Minh. Now we have this recently discovered Qin materials. We have so much that we know very well. It worked perfectly well. You know, the state of Qin was as effective as the mainland China was in 2020 during the fight against coronavirus. You could not move from one section of the country, not just across the borders. You could not move within one county without the passes. And we have in Liye, in this archives, discovered archives, we have passports or laissez-passer for a woman and her child who is 5 months old. So we have the age, the height, the color, etc., and who registered them. Without it, it was impossible, perhaps, to move to another location. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, in these discovered materials, we have very clear exceptions. For instance, in the Shui Hu Ji, the Qin legal materials from the very end of the pre-imperial period, they do recognize the right of the Shi to move across the borders, but they need to have some document. They could not move freely, but they were still allowed to move much more than anybody else. Unlike peasants, unlike all the rest, maybe like merchants who also had the right to move after all, the Shi were entitled to cross the borders. Shang hates it. In the chapter 6 of the book of Lord Shang, there is a very long discussion that it is precisely the melody of the system. These people move from one country to another, and they have Tianxia Yizhai, all under heaven is their own home, and that is why nobody can control them. But even Shang did not suggest that you need to stop this practice. Why? Perhaps here the class interest. Shang was born in the state of Wei, the small Wei, the Bao Wei, the Wei, and then he moved to the larger state of Wei, to Wei Jin, the Wei, and then he moved to Qin. So perhaps he himself would not like to have the border closed forever for everybody, and this is the point. There were some attempts to prevent high-ranking officials from leaving, or potentially militarily savvy officials from leaving, but even these attempts were not consequential enough throughout the Warring States period. Also because every state wanted to benefit from the import of intellectuals, so they could not outlaw export, but allow import. You know, you need to have the borders open somehow in both directions. Maybe this was one of the additional reasons, but this is the point. And yes, as for what you spoke about current Chinese situation, it can be an excellent talk for another discussion, but maybe in-person discussion and not online discussion, because it is fascinating that China rediscovers its past, but is very much afraid of its past simultaneously. And but actually it makes my life in China much more interesting, because I never thought that I will be as relevant as I am to current China's affairs.
Thank you for your answer.
Do we have other questions? Yes. Maybe I could give you the microphone.
Just if possible to introduce.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for your wonderful lecture. I have one question. Could you explain more about Shang and Han Fei's attitude about rates? Yeah, because in one of your points, you point out that the rate is considered as one of the 6 parasites in Shangyang's will. That's why Shangyang they didn't care about the music and the poem and the documentaries. But on the other hand, it seems that they also noticed the importance of race to maintain the government. In one of the example, Han Fei's example, he points out that we need to respect our ruler, just like respect our parents. That means there are certain rules, certain rates we need to obey. So that's my question. Could you explain more about Han Fei and also Shangyang's attitude toward rates? Yeah.
Yes, an excellent question, and actually very, very sophisticated problem, because the term ritual Li, it had two meanings in the period from the springs and autumns to the Warring States period. On the one meaning was the ritual norms from the Western Zhou, which were established in the Western Zhou, which were solidified by the Chunxiu period, and which were also narrated or explained in the ritual text, which proliferated through the Warring States period. These norms were patently unable to stem the disintegration of the political world. They worked not bad. Actually, rites, rituals were the kind of a soft power of the Zhou dynasty. They worked for a few centuries, but by the 6th, 5th century BCE, they could no longer adjust themselves to the new reality. And that is why the rites, in the terms of the established old hereditarily based Zhou norms, they lost their appeal, they lost their relevance. When Shangyang speaks, rights are a good thing. He speaks in the first chapter of the book of Lord Shang, we have the rights are mentioned like the Fa, like something which is not bad. But the old rites, the old ritual system of the Zhou was dead. And then comes Xunzi, and it is the greatest achievement of Xunzi. I wrote about it 20 plus years ago, and I must maybe engage it in you because I have completely different understanding today. But Xunzi, he reinvented the idea of rights as a kind of the universally applicable hierarchic norms, which are not necessarily directly related to the hereditary norms of the Zhou society. And with this respect, rights as a commonly accepted rules of the game, they are quite similar to Fa, but Fa, the laws, Fa exactly, it means different things, but Fa in terms of as laws is something which can be implemented, enforced. Rights is something which is not usually enforced, but which you study and which you incorporate by yourself. And the Fa thinkers were very much reluctant to believe that many people will improve their behavior on the basis of self-cultivation, of self-socialization to certain norms. So Li was not the rites, the rituals were not fundamentally effective means. It did not mean that they are bad. The bad were the old rites inherited from the Western Zhou, which are moribund, which are dead by the time of Han Feizi, and are going to die by the time of Shangyang. But what to do with the rights in you? I don't think that any of the Fa thinkers was against ritual, but I think that they realized that without norms of enforcement, the ritual system is not effective enough in allowing society to function well. They did not believe in soft power. They believed in hard power. When you have a hard power of the laws, everything is okay. When you have soft power of rights, sorry, it doesn't work.
Thank you so much, Professor.
It's very late, so I just want to say hi to Professor Pai, Jia Jinghua, and we met once in Hong Kong, 2019. So I like your speech very much. It's very inspiring, and it's especially helping for a project I'm working on. It's about classical Confucianism, but because Xunzi is included, so I'll be look at Xunzi's relation with Han Fei and other fast thinkers more carefully. Okay, just no question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your final remark, Professor Jia. Thank you, Professor, for this very intriguing talk. As you've seen, there was a very interesting discussion that followed from your talk. Thanks for having accepted our invitation. We do hope we will be able to have you here in person sometime soon.
Thank
Okay,
you.
have a good
Thank you very
day.
much. And thank you to all
Bye-bye.
the audience.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Hope to see you in person very soon.
Thank you. I'm sure we shall have the chance.
Yeah. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.